Morning, man. Good to see you. This is not a guilt trip time. This is we're going to talk here. I want you to feel free to raise your hands and interrupt me at any time. Okay? I'm Dan. So I'm in a situation right now where I've been, as Rock said, 17 years. I was a pastor, 20 years on Moody faculty. I just lost my full-time position. We had a big meltdown. We lost 35 faculty. So I'm back in to the pastorate, which I'm glad to do, interim work, and I'm teaching part-time at Moody. So just a little flex. I talked to my wife, 17 years as a pastor, 20 years as a professor. Now maybe I'll catch back up. It'll be 20 and 20 sometime like that. But I'm 64. I'm not about ready to go up in a rocking chair, right? So I'm going to work with this. But one of the things going on in my life right now is if my wife gets mad at me, she does once in a while, there might be a narrative that goes like this. I get what's left over. You go to school. She doesn't say this, but you're dressed well. The students admire you. You've got these young men and women out there. They admire you. And you put everything out, and then at the end of the day, you come home, you're not worth anything. She doesn't say it like that, but that's the interpretation of this. So I am having to examine my own life right now and say, with the years that I have left, should I just teach until I've got nothing and die, or should I give more to my wife while I'm still healthy? And so that's part of my interaction in my personal walk right now. Hi, Brad. How are you today? Good. So you've got some notes here, and it's my idea just to work through these. The assumption is that we have Scripture undergirding them. My assumption is you also have knowledge of Scripture. I may quote some passages, but I don't want to spend all the time exegeting passages. This is more about application. I think we'll go to noon about on this first. I just see there's a clock. Okay, I can watch that every once in a while. It would be easy to spend the whole time talking about sexual issues, but there are other things that we tend to overlook in our personal ethics that I want to deal with here too. And I do recommend the book, Ministerial Ethics, Moral Formation for Church Leaders. When I teach professional ethics in Moody Seminary, that's one of the required texts for personal ethics. It's really good, and Newt, I believe, is going to talk later on about codes of ethics and so on. But these are some things that I just want to talk with you about: honesty, financial integrity, sexual purity, responsibility to family. I'm going to begin here with honesty and financial integrity, hopefully before noon. And maybe some of these things will expand more. But honesty, boy, telling the truth. Now here's the thing about motives for a pastor. One of the motives for a pastor is you're the big kahuna. And one theory about being a pastor or professor is you want to be those things because you like to be up front, you like a lot of attention, you like other people paying attention to you, so it's kind of an ego thing. Well, I hope there's more calling than that, because that doesn't last very long, because there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that might not make it worth it. But honesty is a big one. We have pastors today who lie and they steal. How is that? Well, maybe not in the classic ways, but let's talk about this. Truthful speech. Truthful speech. You say something in the pulpit. What does your wife think of it? Does your wife know you as an honest person? I'm bringing an office home. I had to clear out my Moody office and bring it home. There's just all kinds of stuff now piled up. I've got twice as much stuff in one office as I need. But when we were uncovering things, my wife saw some Venetian blinds. And she said, "Oh yeah, those are the ones you promised you'd put up in the laundry room." Yeah, that was about 5 years ago. Now the fact is, I lied to my wife. I lied to her. You can say, well, it's just an oversight. No, it's a lie. You said you were going to do something, you didn't do it. So I'm thinking probably tomorrow is a good time to do that. Now the reason I haven't put up the Venetian blinds, one is I'm lazy. I don't put a priority on that. But another is I'm bad with that kind of thing. I'm good at talking. If I could just do 2 things in my life, I'd study and talk. My wife says, "Yeah, you're my book man." That means I can't improve the house in any way. She says, "Yeah, don't do that." So the Venetian blinds, that's hard for me, and I'm always going to get ready for another sermon, another speech, do something along that line. But the fact is, I lied to her. I lied to her. I said I was going to do it. I haven't done it. That's a lie to my wife. So I would say in these little things, we need to have integrity. I don't see myself as a liar, but I lied. I'll bet if I told my parishioner I was going to do something, I'd do it. But with my wife, I feel free not to. What's that, Venetian? What's that doing? It would take me about 30 minutes. Get off your behind and get it done. Just do it. So what's day? Today's Wednesday. Yeah, Thursday is a good day to do that. A wife is in a bad place in a church. Now, as I came up through the church, you preach Sunday morning, you probably teach Sunday night, Wednesday night prayer meeting. Do any of you know what a prayer meeting is? I was just asking. But anyway, that wife, and sometimes, now I usually had an elder, somebody who would teach Sunday school and was willing to do that, but sometimes you'd be teaching 3 or 4 times a week, and your poor wife has to listen to that. 150 times a year with this guy. That's a lot. That is a lot. It's too much. It's too much. And then she sees an inconsistency in your life, and you're her pastor. You're not only her husband, she knows all your problems, but you're her pastor. So I say, God bless the wives. Pray for them. And then when you tell them a lie, that's my pastor. That's not just, and you know this thing when you get in a little argument. You ever had an argument with your wife? Oh, I have, just once or twice. Yeah, my wife's strong-willed. She's going to bring it right to you. But we've had, these discussions, and then she brings up, "Oh, nice job, Pastor." You've had it, haven't you? Well, maybe not, but oof. It reminds me. At home, you need to be the pastor 24/7, right? So we need to be honest with our wives. We need to be honest with our children, don't we? So yeah, I'll take you fishing. I'll play ball with you. I'll take you to the ballet recital. I'll be there and all that stuff, and then we don't show. So it's very important for us to be honest with our families. Tell the truth. Truthful speech. In the pulpit, we are prone to exaggerations. Be careful of that, because you're in a power position. You exaggerate. You have that story, and you come out a little bit better than you really were. You need to have accurate illustrations. Now, I have not gotten, I would say, very rarely have I gotten in trouble in preaching with exegesis. Pretty strong in that. I check myself well. When I've gotten in trouble, it's when I have given an illustration that I didn't check out just as much as I should have. I like the Civil War, American Civil War. I study it quite a bit just for fun, and I'll use some illustrations. So I once gave an illustration about the Battle of Gettysburg. And I've been out to the field, and I A few years ago, I went out with my buddy. He's a Civil War guy. He was teaching at Capital Seminary at the time in Maryland. We went to the various fields, Fredericksburg, the Wilderness, Gettysburg. And I gave the illustration in the sermon. I said, Lee did such and such, and the people that were assembled in Grant. And after the sermon, one of my elders came up to me and he said, Dan, just want you to know, Grant was not at Gettysburg. I said, well, yeah, he was. No. He said he was not. He's more forceful that time. No, he was not. He was at Vicksburg at the time of Gettysburg. Okay. Now that wasn't exactly dishonest, but it was inaccurate. I think when you're talking about dishonesty, you might attach motive to that. So in ethics, motives are a big deal. Why do you do what you do, right? So maybe we tell this exaggeration to puff ourselves up. How about resumes? Is your resume accurate? Were you really all that? Not puffing ourselves up is an important thing, because in the ministry, we can start thinking we're all that, can't we? We start thinking we're pretty big stuff. People admire you. They come to you for counsel. And they need to hear real honesty. So honesty in speech. Not lying to people. That's clear. Try to be really careful to tell the truth and not to exaggerate for your own benefit. Then there's honesty in industrious work. Industrious work. Now, I think that most pastors work hard. I believe most missionaries work hard. But I'd say there's probably are no professions in the world where a person can get away with being lazy more easily than in the pastorate and in missions. The reason is there's very little accountability. You could dog it. You could fail in your preparations. Could sleep in. I don't know, just park your car at the church and go home and sleep. I don't know. Have I ever done it? No, because I'm too obsessive to do that. So I think that when you're trying to be honest in your work week, you should have a schedule that people know. These hours I'm studying. These hours I'm available for counsel. And these hours I'm with the leaders, and so on. And that should be a pretty steady schedule. Now for me, it was simple, and I'm talking about when I was in the pastorate. Now my pastorate, my schedule as a professor is very different. But when I was in the pastorate, I would get up Mondays through Fridays, and I would study in the mornings. Then in the afternoons, I'd be available. I'd do administration and reading and something, but I was available for my people. I also kept a weekly schedule, hours. Every week I was in the pastorate for 17 years. Just had a hour-by-hour thing. Okay, so I'm studying 2 Samuel for 3 hours for my sermon prep. And then I did this reading and so on and so on. Now, I will tell you, in those 17 years, nobody ever asked me for that. But I had it. And I had it primarily for my own accountability, but I had it also in case anybody ever asked. Well, here it is. Because in some cultures, and it was a little bit true in mine, real work is where you get your hands dirty. It's not real work if you're just reading and you sit around in your street clothes like I do. That's my job, right? So that was important. People should have a work ethic. I remember a guy that lived across, used to live on the Illinois River, and there was a young guy who lived across the way from me, and he kept unusual hours. I'm not saying he didn't work, but he would stay up studying till 2 or 3 in the morning, and then he would sleep in until about 11 in the morning. Now, this is a farm community. Okay, so the pastor's asleep. We've been up since 5 o'clock in the morning. Now, we went to bed at 9 and he's still up, but you need to conform your schedule to theirs, probably, right? So even though he was working hard, it was a bad testimony in some ways. You cannot believe, some of these farmers, they've never known anybody in their life in bed at 11 o'clock in the morning. Just don't even know people like that. Those cows are bleeding by then. The udders are full, and we need help, and so forth. So, industrious work. I was able to shield myself a little bit from interruptions by saying something like this in the mornings. I'd say in the mornings is my time for Bible study, preaching, getting ready to preach, and for prayer. And I would keep that until by 11:30, and I'd say, after that, please feel free to call. And if it's an emergency, call me 24/7. You can call me anytime, day or night, in an emergency. If it's not an emergency, I would like you to try not to call during study time. And if you add prayer on, they really leave you alone because nobody wants to interrupt prayer, right? This honesty is a big thing. Don't loaf in the pastorate. I think of these people, how hard they work so that we don't have to work another job. Now, some of you are bivocational probably. You're needing to work some, but it is a very big deal when somebody sets you aside. They pay your salary to read the Bible and to represent them before the Lord in prayer. So we ought not to take advantage of that. Now, part of a great thing of being a pastor is you have flexibility. So I did put in some evening hours. You know that. You're working sometimes when other people aren't. But I could be the one to be at my daughter's play at the grade school at 10:30 in the morning. I might be one of only a couple of men that get to do that because the other guy's on second shift or something like that. So you can get some privileges with your schedule. That's okay, I think. But then be sure that you're putting in enough work as well. So the check here is just to ask yourself, am I really working hard? Sometimes elders will check on a guy and he'll say, oh yeah, I'm working a lot of hours, and his wife will be saying, no, you're not. You're back and forth, you're here in the house, you're fooling around, you're playing with the kids, you're doing a lot of different things. You're really not working that hard. She knows. So back to the wife again, right? Now, you can work too hard. We're not talking about that today. We're talking about the ethics of not working hard enough and doing a good job. I think probably there was a generation of pastors who did work too hard, but I'm hearing more and more from younger pastors today, we expect to work a 40-hour week. I said, when did that happen? I've never heard of a pastor working 40 hours.
Andy Stanley wrote it.
Yeah, I'm not hot on that, I'll be honest with you. Because here's the way I look at it. You all want elders, right? You want biblical elders. Well, how long are they working? Well, in my world, they're working 45 or 50 hours, maybe not including their commute. And then you're going to sign them up to be an elder, and if you're a good elder, we say that's probably 10 more hours. Okay, so you've got their 40 or 50 plus 10, 60, and you're going to work 40? Wait a minute. They're working 60, you're working 40? How does that work? So I'm not on board with that. I'm not saying work yourself into a clinical depression, but I am saying that sounds a little bit weak to me. If I were a pastor and I were hiring a staff pastor and I said, what are your expectations? And he said 40 hours a week, I'd probably say, well, I probably wouldn't call him back. Your expectations are a little unrealistic here.
I have a question.
Yes.
What about in a church like my church is small, like 30, 35 people? Like, what am I supposed to do all day? Work on my sermon, or like how does that work out?
Yeah,
I'm bivocational, but not during the summer. I drive school bus.
Well, but
And
okay,
how does that,
yeah.
What does that look like
Well, you're bivocational, so you aren't on the same kind of schedule somebody else is on because you are needing to work those other hours. So I would relax those expectations in my own mind. So they can't expect full-time hours for part-time pay, right? But we all know that there's no such thing as a part-time pastor, only part-time pay, right? But I would, in this case, I would let you off the hook on that because you're doing something else too. But in my, also now, sermon preparation for me is the same. I've preached to 2,000, I've preached to 8. Sermon preparation should be the same, right? So that's the same amount of hours no matter how big or how small your church is. Your counseling is going to be different. Your time developing leadership is probably pretty much the same. So there are a lot of the things that are quite similar no matter what the size of the church is. Not everything. Yeah. Yeah. But you're having to work, and I commend you for that, for being willing to pastor that church and to do the bivocational thing. That's a hard way to go. It's a hard way to go. So good for you. Yeah. I know I said it doesn't sound like a guilt trip, and everything I say makes you feel guilty, but I don't mean for that to happen. Yeah.
Dr. Green, how do you handle criticism that comes from the congregation when you get that you don't work hard enough? You know, maybe they drive by the church and they don't see your car there, and you know you're putting in 50, 60 hours a week, but you got a couple people who say, we don't think you work hard enough.
Yeah. Well, I like that timesheet, unless they're going to say I forged it. But I keep that, and that's one thing I would say. The other thing is, most people don't understand what it takes to be a pastor. They don't understand sermon preparation, and they don't understand the side reading that you need to do to keep up with counseling and other things that are going on. So I would say to them, and this would be part of the education of a congregation, how long do you think it takes to prepare a message? Now, I would say 15 to 20 hours, and that's when you're experienced. A message that took me probably 25 hours when I was young, I can now do in 15 or 16. But I would say, you can preach a bad sermon. It's easy to preach poorly. It's hard to preach well. And anybody can get a sermon ready in 2 or 3 hours if they don't know what they're doing. If they know what they're doing, it's going to take 15 or 20. Minimal, I would say. So if somebody came to me like that, I would push back. I'd push back on them. And I would start taking them down the line, not with names named, but I would say, are you aware in our congregation that we have such and such situation that I deal with, and this and this? So I would say a lot of people don't really know what it takes to be a pastor. Now, my own experience was that most people are very, very appreciative. And I would say if there are a couple of cranks there that just bug you, I would, now I'm 64, so I don't, I'm not 35 now. What is your age? 35. Okay. At 64, I would say, do we have an issue here? If we have an issue, let's settle it right now. Okay? Because I work plenty hard enough, I can demonstrate that to you. Do you have a problem beyond my work ethic? And we might as well settle this man-to-man right now. Okay? That's what I do. Because some of these guys, some of these people that ask those questions, they're just bullies. And you can't let them take you. So that's what I'd say. But if you have the worksheet, that is why I had that in the first place. Just pull that out of the file. There it is. Now, you can't have personal names of people that you counseled and so on, but you could have a block there that I counseled during this time. Does that satisfy you, or would that work, or what?
Yeah, sure. So it's always hard, I think, to know when to respond to criticism and when to let it go. Because I think sometimes people could say, well, it's like the comment section in YouTube. You got to pick and choose if you're going to read it or if you're not going to read it. And
Yeah.
sometimes criticism is criticism. It just is what it is.
If I'm hearing this through the grapevine, I would tend not to respond to it. If it's personal, I would. If they're bold enough to kind of come on the attack on this, you're not working hard or something, I say, can you demonstrate that? In what area? I'd ask them for some specifics. Now the other thing is, where you are, do you have an administrator in the building with you?
See, we're a country church.
Right.
With 4 cornfields around us, so, you know, we're in that boat where you can work wherever you want to work from. You can work from home if you want.
Okay, now if I were you, I would work at the church. And I would have my car there when I'm there.
I just keep my car there. I go do whatever I want.
Then why are they saying you don't work hard? Okay, so again, some of that might be the culture. You don't get your hands dirty, you don't do this. Once in a while, you might be out on the combine with them. You might pitch some bales up onto the trailer, stuff like that. But they've got their job and you've got yours. So I would say, you know, we seem to have a misunderstanding about what work is. And I might explain a little bit to them about culture. You know, you've hired me here not to be a farmer. You've hired me to be a pastor. And the life of a pastor is a life of a mind. It's a life of study. And if they persisted in this, I would say, do you realize how many books I read in a year? How many do you read? That's getting a little nasty, but you just need. So when I started, I was in a country church too, and when I started mentoring men, I wanted to use Spiritual Leadership by J. Oswald Sanders. Pretty good book. And one of the guys there was about 25, and he said, Dan, I'm struggling with a book. I haven't read a book since high school. 7 years he hadn't read a book. And how many books do we read in a year? You know, you go through seminary, you're reading 30 books a year, and so forth. So I would say part of that's education too. But for the most part, I just didn't have that problem. My elders were trying to get me to back off. I probably worked harder than I should have at times. That was from more poor motivation when I was young, because I wanted to prove myself and all that stuff. I didn't need to prove myself to them. But if it's just 1 or 2 people, I'd address it.
If it's straightforward. If it's through the grapevine, don't run to it.
I don't chase grapevine. That's just, you know, people who don't have the courage to come forth, I just, unless I felt it was starting to affect my ministry. I definitely would not, don't start talking from the pulpit about stuff that's coming through the grapevine, because that just shows your weakness, and you're misusing power. Then don't do it. Don't do that.
I was going to say, I keep a notes page on my computer. I keep every book I read.
Yeah.
And I do it personally, but also it could help in a situation like this, because Newton had us do a master schedule, part of his class, and when he taught here, and that's great, and that helps. I keep that, and then also have the book list. And so that way, you know, if someone asks a question about what I've been reading, you know, I can only pull up so much data out of my brain in the moment, but I can always go and say, hey, here's what I've read over the last 12 months.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. And in a suburban setting, you don't have the much problem with the idea of getting paid for an intellectual life, because that's the way they're living too, right? So it's a little more of a country thing. Also, when you're in the city, oh, a doctor, man, he's really worked. We appreciate it. In the country, doctor, ooh, you know, he's come by egghead. So we don't know if we'll be able to relate to him. So you have to kind of work with that kind of thing. But with country people, you need to demonstrate that you're one of the group, because the city life is more excellence. They look at your credentials, like Rock today read my credentials. City people are impressed with that. Country people are more impressed with your person. So I'd say get out and be with them, spend time with them. I would guess some of that would dissipate. But if it doesn't, I'm just not going to chase a couple of naysayers. But if they're powerful, you know, powerful people sometimes like power. So if you've got a bully, that bully, sometimes you need to be in his face. Okay? Don't talk to me like that anymore. Okay? If we're going to have it out, let's have it out right now. Okay? Now, you don't do that very many times, but sometimes the person of strength appreciates strength. So I'm coaching, right now I'm doing some coaching with a young woman who's entering into a staff of men. She's going to be a mentor. I said, you're going to need to stand up for yourself. She's really strong, Elijah. You need to stand up for yourself. You need to represent your ministry. See? So, yeah. Don't be discouraged by a couple of bad people, because most of them love you. Most people love their pastors. Yeah.
I'd like to hear your comments in this topic of industrious work regarding how that intersects with vacation or family time.
Mm-hmm.
Using the example where your daughter had a kids program, she's in 4th grade and you went to the program at 10 a.m. How do you balance that and then incorporated with that some of the naysayers or the critics or people who may have not a clear understanding of the schedule of a pastor?
Yeah.
So how do you balance industrious work with family time, personal time, vacation,
Yeah.
things like that?
Yeah. I love what Newt taught there about a yearly calendar. So I would have my calendar. I don't publish this to everybody, but I would have a calendar so I know what I'm preaching usually 6 months ahead at least, sometimes a year, sometimes 18 months ahead, where I will passage by passage schedule my time. I also had 3 weeks of vacation in the pastorate. I would schedule those. Boy, about every 3 months in the pastorate, I would get hard to live with. You can just feel it, hard to live with. You can feel it, you get a little crabby at home, it's time for a break. Okay, so I would schedule those vacations in. I also had some conference time. I would schedule those in. So when you start the year, okay, you've got 3 weeks of vacation. If they give you a conference and you have to preach at the end of the week, that's not a conference. They're cheating you, because you can't preach on Sunday and go to that conference and enjoy it because you have to work all week. So they're about 5 weeks out there. I'll schedule those in. Also, I religiously took a day off every day, every week, take it off. So right now I had a guy who came to me. He's Moody's Pastors Conference, so alumni come back, and one of the seminary grads came to me, and he was down. He had sent me an email before he came, and it was a downer email. I sent back to him, said, Joe, it's not his name, Joe, you are on the brink of clinical depression. Oh, no, I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's that bad. I said, you are nearly depressed. So he was coming to town. I went out to lunch with him, spent a couple of hours. I set him up with a counselor for a couple of sessions. And at the end of that time, he was quite different. But one of the things I talked to him about was, how's your day off? Well, I don't want to say, why aren't you taking a day off? Guys, take a day off! Take a day off. Now here's the thing. You are not indispensable. See? God can run the church without you. That's one of the issues. Oh, what will happen if I take a day off? Nothing. The church is better off. So that's a big one. And here's the thing about vacation. You need a break from them. They need a break from you too. Believe it or not, they're actually happy when other people come to speak. Because this guy, well, we know what he's saying anyway. It's big. Take a day off. My elders, now I had some good elders evidently. My elders saw that I was driven. Because, okay, part of this, guys, I went into a clinical depression 1990, 91. I remember it because of Desert Storm. It was mine too. So I was trying to plant a church. I was teaching at Moody Evening School and doing a doctorate at the same time. Sound smart? No. Driven. So I can work hard. So 2 people can work about the same schedule. One will burn out and one will do fine, and the difference will be motivation. Why are we doing what we're doing? It's this thing about just driving yourself into the ground is no good. It's no good. So that thing, my elders tried to get me, Dan, take 2 days off. Don't just take 1, take 2. I got to 1.5. Another thing I did in this time is I had some buddies who were about my age in a similar church situation, and we met once a month for an afternoon. Now, this would be on my day off. So, okay, I took Saturdays. Okay, I started taking Mondays. Mondays, for some reason, is the day a lot of pastors like to take off. But then one of my friends said to me, Dan, why would you take Mondays off? Monday's the worst day of the week. Right? You have Sunday, you're up, and then Monday, Monday you're thinking, you're dragging your knuckles like a gorilla. And so he'd say, Monday's the worst day of the week. Work on Monday. Take a day off when you're refreshed. Okay, so I took Monday off, and then Saturdays I'd be working, but sort of looking at the football game and being mad because everybody else was out and I wasn't. So I started taking Saturdays off, and then Tuesday at noon I would be off. Now think of this. If you work in the morning and you take off at noon, you've got till 10 o'clock at night, not just 5. Right? So you've got noon until 10 o'clock at night, and you're gone from the church. And I do mean gone. That means you may not have access to this. You may not call me. I'm gone. I wouldn't give them my personal phone number. Are you kidding me? So we did this, and remember, your wife needs time off too. So those Tuesday afternoons, Saturday would be family more, but Tuesdays, once a month I'd meet with my buddies. We'd go to Old Country Buffet, and these are guys outside the church, they're pastors. And we would sit there from noon, usually until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We'd just talk about life. And we were pastors, we were young married guys, we were church planting. So the similarities in life were pretty important. But that was good. We'd stay there until the evening meal started, and you can't eat once, twice, so we'd go home. We were going to read a book. Somewhere through the first session, we threw the book away, and we said we're just going to talk about life. We were together probably close to 10 years in this group. We are all very good friends today. I would say we probably all had our ministry saved at some point through that time. So it was very refreshing. But taking that regular day off, guys, do it. Now, I'm not a Sabbatarian. I don't believe you have to do that. And I could get into some other things. It seems to me with the Old Covenant, things like tithing and having to keep the Sabbath and so forth, passed. Do you preach those things? If you're preaching tithing, you should quit. But that's another issue. Where do you ever get tithing? In 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, study that and preach that instead. Tithing, oh my God. Well, anyway. But take that day off, and then take your vacations. Those Tuesdays, what I'm getting to is, sometimes I would take a kid with me when they were little, but sometimes every other one, my wife would get that Tuesday, and I'd stay home with the kids. Because she's going nuts too. She's got little kids. And she needed time, not just family time on Saturday, but she needed time to go out too. So every other Tuesday, she took off. And she'd sometimes take a kid, and I'd have 2. She'd just hope the kids are alive when she gets home, stuff like that. But that was very refreshing. That's good for your marriage. And then sometimes we didn't have a good babysitter. I was going to say sometimes we'd go together, but then some other times we'd probably go with the whole family too. But I would say you have to intentionally schedule that time. Again, if you have to preach on Sunday, that's not vacation. If I had a whiteboard, I'd show you this, but I'll just do this. A week of vacation for your people, when does it start? It starts on Friday night. The labor workers I had, man, when it came time for cat vacation, Caterpillar was down by, these guys would have their boats and trailers ready. They'd drive it with them on Friday, and Friday night at 3, cat vacation started. They were gone. All right, so their vacation starts, your parishioners' vacation starts on Friday night, and it goes Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, all the way through. But your vacation does not go that way, does it? Because you're working on Friday, and Saturday and Sunday, and your vacation starts on Monday. Play for that, guys. Every time you have a vacation, it's 9 days. 3 weeks is 27 days. How many days do I get? Oh, I never thought about that. Yeah, think about it. So if you play with some of these things, I think that helps too. They think, oh, I never thought about that, Pastor. Yeah, you can have another day of vacation if you preach on Sunday. No, I don't want that. I want a real vacation. How are we doing? Again, some of this is attitude. I think if you work, people are really going to appreciate that. And again, I think my thing was I worked too hard, and that can be a sin too, where my people say, hey, man, But yeah, schedule those. Oh, and one more thing. Do not ever, 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 ever schedule vacation between Christmas and New Year's. That is vacation. Okay. You guys are going to learn a lot today. Oh, I'm sorry. I hope the parishioners aren't listening to this too much. Nobody calls you between Christmas and New Year's. Nobody cares if you go visit your family during that time. Just do what they do. So I would say study the ebbs and flows of your calendar and use those to your advantage. How many of you guys would say you're moderately burned out right now? Students, don't raise your hands. You're always burned out. Okay. Nobody burned out? Oh, okay, I don't believe that. You're just too tired to raise your hands. Okay. Yeah. I would say taking a regular day off is a discipline of the Christian life. It refreshes you. And your day off is not necessarily a day off from the Lord. There are no days off from the Lord. This is a day off from the church. So you can still be thinking about Christian things. But I wouldn't be doing a lot of hard reading. We okay? Ready to move on? Okay. Industrious work. Also acknowledgement of sources. When you use somebody else's material in a sermon and you do not give the name, that is stealing. Almost every year now at Moody, I'll have a student in the elevator with me, and they will say, Dr. Green, I've had a bad week. My pastor got caught plagiarizing sermons. Now, if it were me and I were an elder, I would give one warning, and if there was more plagiarism, I would fire the pastor. It's stealing. It's so easy to give a source. For instance, I was preaching Sunday. I'm preaching at a church now, going through some Psalms, and I was giving a particular quote. I quoted it, and I just said, biblical scholar Oswald says. That's all he had to say. That's all he had to say. So why wouldn't you say that? I got called to consult with a church a couple of years ago. And the guy said, it's kind of an embarrassing subject, but our pastor is plagiarizing. And this guy was plagiarizing messages. He had a doctorate in preaching. He knows how to do the work. But the messages, it wasn't even hidden. It was just like verbatim. Somebody else, and we talked to him, and then I ended up, they said, we don't know what a sermon really should sound like. So I taught the elders, I gave them a mini course in homiletics. I said, well, here's something, you should be able to hear this in a message. And I talked to him. And we all talked together. We talked right out in a big meeting. There were 2 or 3 elders, and there's another pastoral staff guy, and this guy. They just were not getting good messages. So give sources. It's easy to do. Just name the name. Yes.
Discussion said, I've got great sermons. All my material is available to you. use my stuff, just cite me. How do you think that would go if I stood in front of my church and said, I borrowed this entire sermon from fill in the blank? How does that help with ethics or integrity as far as just delivering? I know you'd probably fine-tune a little bit of it to personalize it, but that to me seems a little off too.
I grow so much through my own exegesis, I couldn't possibly consider preaching somebody else's stuff. I just couldn't do it. It wouldn't be me, and I would lose. Even now, you say, oh, Dr. Green, I bet you preach your messages all over. I bet you just grab something out of the file and preach it again. I have messages I've preached 10 times. I'll tell you, every time I preach it, I enter back into it. So my messages take me probably close to 20 hours the first time. They take me 5 hours to warm up. But I'm not preaching anybody else's stuff. You know, guy says, preach my stuff. I say, no, thanks. That's you. How can you preach that? You haven't checked out the exegesis. You don't know if he's correct. The illustrations don't ring true. I would say no thanks. I suppose, I've never done this, but I suppose it would be possible to preach a historic message and just say, today I'm enacting this person and I'm going to preach the message. But I wouldn't be for that, bro. I couldn't do it. Yeah. But if you were going to take part of that, I would just say, I heard so-and-so say this. I often use the term, when God says, don't, he means don't hurt yourself. James MacDonald said it. I love it. So I'll say, you know, you've heard James MacDonald maybe say, when God says don't, means don't hurt yourself. That's all I had to do. It's not mine. Now, if somebody's out there say, well, yeah, you got that from James MacDonald, that sounds like lack of integrity on my part. I'd say it would be. If you are in a position where you think you have to preach other people's stuff without attribution, then you should probably examine your schedule and see where you're spending your time. Because if you're in a senior position, you should be preaching, and the church should recognize that you need time to do that well. If you laid out a transmission in front of me, a car, it cost a lot to fix a transmission. Had to rework that thing. I can do all I need to do in about 5 minutes. It would not run. The guy who knows how to do it, I suppose a skilled guy, 10, 12 hours. He works on that. Same with the sermon. People don't know what to do, can do it quickly and do it poorly. If you know what you're doing, it takes a long time. And now, as I'm getting older, so you've got, in preaching, you've got two things, don't you? You have their town, that's the town of the text. And you have our town, that's the town in which we live. That's Duval and Hayes. Their town, our town. It's a helpful metaphor, their town, our town. We're back and forth in our preaching. When I was in seminary, I was really good in our town, so I had THM in their town, THM in Old Testament. I was really into the text. I still am, hopefully. But as I've gotten older, I've seen more and more importance of our town, and I understand it better. So now, my sermons are probably split half and half in time between their town and our town. When I was starting preaching, I was 80%. In their town, I sort of tacked on the supporting material, you know. So it is hard work. Our town is hard because you have to exegete your culture and all that. So there's a lot of work to do. So if it's not yours, this also helps your credibility too. So if you're giving a quote, you're reading a book and you say, I read this week in such and such, and here was a quote, that tells them also that you are reading something besides the Bible. You should be, right? And that helps credibility. So in my schedule, again, now I was preaching in a small church when I started, smaller church. I had Monday afternoons were booked out. So Monday through Friday mornings I would study for my sermons, but Monday afternoon was booked, was just for common reading. And I would try to read about one book a year, or one book a month, on just whatever's out there. What the people are reading, I would read. The latest theological controversy, worship wars. I remember at one point when I was in the pastor, it was spiritual gifts were all the rage, and I'd read something like that. I would like to think I read about 12 books a year. It's probably about 10, but that was Monday afternoons. Monday afternoons I'd read some systematic theology just to stay in tune with that. And I tried to read through the English Bible every year, keep my Greek and Hebrew current. He said, "Oh man, that's a lot of work." Yeah, you're a pastor. You are a pastor. You got a big job. So, are we good on that? You want to move on? Do you have any yes buts? If you have protests, protest to me.
The sermon, but this applies probably true. If you come up with a great outreach idea that you stole from a magazine, you should probably say, "I got this from the magazine."
Well, that helps too, because one of our frustrations is that we work so hard to get something going and people, they submarine it. I would say, yeah, I got this idea and it's worked in a lot of churches. I think it will in ours too. Now we'll have to tweak this for our own area, but I think that would actually help you. Yeah, sure. You should attribute it to the author.
Haddon Robinson, before he died, gave a commencement speech. He stole the outline. He said it in the beginning of a sermon. He said, "Since it's a commencement speech and everybody's graduating, I'm going to do the right thing and plagiarize my message." And he gave credit to who he was giving credit to, but he just stole the outline. I always thought that was noble. It's a neat way of saying that he's borrowing it from somebody else.
But that was the former president at Denver Seminary. I think what's that guy's name? You remember that? Was it Brennan Grounds? I don't know.
It might have been. It was on
Yeah.
Proverbs.
Yeah. Well, okay. That is a very unusual circumstance. It's ceremonial. When I do a wedding, I use a program. I use a Presbyterian form so I don't think I really have to say that, but I use the same thing every time. Don't let people manufacture their own messages. That drive you nuts. They want to do their own service and all, especially in the no. You can do this part, but I'm going to keep to this form here. Yeah, I think that was okay. But if you ever heard Haddon Robinson, he works in the text. He works. Yeah, he's with the Lord now. Yeah. That textbook he has, I require at Biblical Preaching in my preaching course. Most textbooks sell about 5,000 copies and then they're out. That textbook has sold over 1 million. That has changed the face of preaching around the world. It's just wonderful. So, yeah. Let's talk about money. Financial integrity. So we have work, we have money. So there's reasonableness here in salary and benefit expectations. There's a church that's would like me to be their pastor, and the guy sat down with me. He's an attorney. He said, "We know how to pay a pastor." He didn't give me numbers. I don't want any numbers because I said I don't want to do something full-time right now. He said, "We know how to pay a pastor." Most churches don't. Most churches will lowball you. So I would say a good starting point, now I'll teach my beginning students this, try to negotiate for a teacher's salary in your area for somebody who has your level of education and your level of experience. Okay? You have a master's degree plus 15. What would that earn a teacher? You also are working 11 months a year, not 9 or 10. Your master's degree was also 3 years at least, not 1. So those things can be compared. You can find that out from any superintendent. You just make a phone call. What is the salary of a teacher? That's public information. That is a good negotiating point. Now, if you've got a master's degree and no experience, you're not in a very good bargaining position yet. What you need is a job. You probably don't bargain for your first job, you just hope to get one. Well, you say, well, it's not a job, it's a ministry. Yeah, you get paid for it, it's a job. I know what you mean, though. But you get your foot in the door, and later on, you can negotiate. And the reason you negotiate is also for your family. If you have this thing, well, I'm just serving the Lord, and I'll take whatever you give me, that hurts your wife and family sometimes. So I think sometimes we need to represent a little bit better. Yes, I know 1 Timothy 5. We shouldn't do it just for the money, but we're also supposed to provide for our wives and our family. Sometimes a church can do better than they're doing, and if you leave the church because they're not paying you well, that hurts them too. I would say for a number of years in the church where I was, they could have done a little better. I was excited because I was getting paid to study the Bible. I got to do so much studying in that smaller church. But finally, a former pastor's kid got on the elder board, and I almost instantly got a big raise. Isn't that interesting? They didn't know. I know what he said. He said, well, we're going to take care of this before we take care of anything else. He was raised in a home probably where his dad got lowballed. So I think that was a good thing. Another thing I didn't do this to be manipulative, but we would have a congregational meeting once a year, thankfully not more than that, and there would be a budget there, and I had people ask me, Dan, how are we doing on paying you? This wasn't an elder asking, they just asked me that. And I said, well, what I would say to you, I would say it's a hard question for me to answer, but I'd say, could you raise a family of 5 on my salary? I remember one of the elders' wives was sitting down in the front, she did this. I said, I've got a raise coming. Because you know, the elders run the church, but it's really their wives, right? That's a little joke. But it's true. Because the elders make one decision, then they go home, talk to their wives about it, and it's reversed the next week. I got a raise because I answered it that way. And the elder's wife stuck up because the women know what it takes to run a family better than the men do. Men usually turn over their check in some way to the wife, and she administrates everything, right? So, but that, I think, you need to be reasonable. If you're in a church that just can't pay you, and you think you're called to that, then you do the bivocational thing because you love them and you think that's your calling. If you're going to chafe under that all the time, then I think you should leave for another ministry. But you shouldn't stay and complain. That is unethical. We shouldn't, as Christians, be complainers. If you can't live with your situation, leave or address it, right? Address it. I've talked to various people about this. Most people would say the pastor should be at least in the middle of the congregation in salary. Now, you know about what that means. You could sit, unless you're in a really large church, you could sit down in your office and figure out within a few $1,000s what every person in your church makes. Say, no, you couldn't. Yes, you could. Because that's the way your mind works. You just kind of figure, well, that's kind of in the middle there. I'm married to a Chinese woman, and on her side of the family, her brother-in-law says that is not adequate for a pastor. A pastor should be paid in the high end of the range, or else people won't respect him. So some of this is cultural, but I would say a pastor should be at least in the middle. Do most of you guys think you're in the middle? Are you okay? If you're in the middle or better, I think that's good. Your education is probably higher. I don't know, depending on you, your stress might be lower than in some jobs. I would say, too, one thing for us is not to underestimate what other people are going through every day in their work life. Say, oh, we're stressed out. Yeah, but other people are stressed out, too. One thing I find is a lot of my stresses in the ministry came from within me, not from without. And the stuff within me, I need to deal with it. If I'm poorly motivated or I'm too driven, boy, you need to examine that. Okay? I don't want to get way into this, but I realized that I projected my dad's attitudes toward me onto God. And that made a big difference when I figured that out. In that year I was burned out, I went to counseling, and I kind of figured out, yeah, my dad never really accepted me. It was never really good enough. And I projected that onto God. God, that's not his response. That's not his response. I have imputed righteousness. God regards me as highly as he possibly could. So that's not my dad. So if you got inner stuff going on, fix it. Dig it out. Work it out some way. Don't put that on the church. But I think a lot of times people are not that aware of what's going on. They haven't thought about your salary. You think about it. They don't. They've got a life. A lot of them come to church on Sunday. And you may have some guys on the board who are just cheap. That's what they are. They're cheap. They're penny pinchers. And they need to flex. Okay. Again, hi everybody that's tuned in here. If you're in a country church, it's easy to play poor down on the farm. Okay? When they're sitting on $1 million of land. A lot of people sitting on $1 million of land. They could pay you a little more. They write off those ATVs. They do a lot of things. It's easy to play poor on the farm. Okay? So you can't quite let them get away with that, I think. Yes?
A lot of churches use leadership network and church management workbooks. They compare even where you are in the country, the size of the church.
Oh, that's good.
Very helpful.
Leadership management.
Leadership Network publishes one, and church management.
That's very good. Yeah.
Size of church, full-time.
Yeah. Oh, that's
benefits, health, everything.
That's good. Yeah. That is a big help too, because you can quote some outside source. You're not just looking for yourself. Yes.
I think there's sometimes confusion around that housing allowance too. I've heard that, well, you get a housing allowance, so you should be fine. How would you address that idea? Because nobody else in my congregation gets a housing allowance.
Well, just a side issue, I get B.J. Worth every year. She's right here in town. Beverly Jean Worth, she's about the best. Wow. Call her and she'll save you money. Woo-wee. She's not my sister-in-law or anything like that. Solid. And she does pastor's taxes and farm taxes. She's a specialist. They know. When I studied her stuff, I knew quite a bit more about pastor's taxes than the average tax consultant. Not more than her, but you can call her. So The catch with the write-offs you get from that are that you're then considered self-employed and you have to pay double Social Security taxes. Now, you do save some money, but I would say still do that comparison that you're talking about, and that will take care of that. But the housing allowance is helpful, but it's not that much. It's not that much. Yes?
For, like, I'm trying to figure out how to word this, but as a pastor looking at you may need an increase in pay, what is the best way to ask the congregation for that?
Mhm.
Because I lived through a situation that, like, the pastor was almost shamed by the congregation because he asked that question. And so what's the best way of the pastor looking at the congregation and respectfully asking that question without having that negative bounce back?
I think you should have a built-in discussion with the elder board every year. Because for tax purposes, you have to have your whole package in an official board meeting. Say this is the year 2018 now. The December meeting or earlier has to have your package in it. Now, I wouldn't trust December because December is the holidays and you may or may not work. They may just cancel the meeting. So I'd want that in my November meeting, which means the negotiations need to be probably in October. So the first thing is everybody needs to know that this will be discussed every year at a certain time. So that helps you. And if you need to make an appeal, they know if there's another child added to the... And I would say most people, at least in their minds, think that they're doing right by you. But I would go in with this negotiation. Now, if you are a staff person, the senior is the one who needs to take the lead on this. If I were a senior pastor, I would want to represent my staff. So I would say, and you are Peter, sorry. Peter is not getting all that he needs. If I were in his situation, I would want more, and I want more for him. So if you're looking if you watch football right now, I'm a Michigan State fan, so I was watching the Michigan and Ohio State. Their head coaches get such and such, but one of the assistant staffs got a lot more than the other one. So that implies they're going to have more strength and they're going to retain better people. I would say, if I were your senior, Peter has done well by us, and he's going to have other opportunities. I want to see him paid better. So that's up to him to represent you. Now, if you're the senior, you can represent yourself. Do you agree with that? Because you've been a pastor with a staff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the larger the church, the more they care for the senior, but they don't really care that much about youth pastors, and you got to fight for them
Yeah.
for assistance.
Yeah. This gets caught up in a budget. So I have a student right now who's a dynamite student, and they've already done a credit check. So a credit check, background check. So they want to hire her, but there's a hang up with the budget passing. We don't know what's going on. So I'm trying to, it's good that they've done that background check, but they've been stringing her along for a long time. So somebody needs to get off their behind on this. I don't know if there's an elder who wants to hold back the budget, okay. Maybe there's some legitimacy. Maybe there's been too much spending. I don't know. But somebody needs to say, probably the senior pastor, let's get this done or not. Okay? We want her on the staff. Now, whatever this thing is going on, let's get it done. We're stringing her. Come on. Right? So, sometimes you get in a situation where you really want to help and the budget is not passing. That's a pain in the neck. But if we want people in the church, if we want real elders, then you have to abide by the decisions of real elders, right? Or else they're just yes men. We could go into that. You don't want yes men as elders. That's pitiful. It's pitiful. Yeah. When the elder tells you no, it ticks you off, but then you say thank you at some point. At least that was my experience. Now we, in my church, we usually only had 4 or 5 elders, but we did a consensus vote, not unanimous. Unanimous means I think everybody agrees, but we had consensus where everybody has to go along. Once in a while, a guy would dig his heels in, and we respected that. I was like, oh man, you said 4 to 1. Oh boy, sometimes the one would turn out to be right. I'm speaking from a Presbyterian rule, right, and so forth, and maybe you have congregational and so on. But reasonableness, boy, we're still on that point. That's a big point, isn't it? We want to know about that. But you do have to have reason, and don't get greedy. Most of us are not in ministry for that. But you need to represent your wife. Your wife, if your wife, okay, if the congregation is making your children suffer, your wife will resent it. And if your wife resents it, you will be out of ministry at some point, because she loves those kids. She's with them all day. To this day, I need to be careful. When I was in the pastor, I need to be careful of criticizing the kids because my wife would jump me. And it was right, too. I remember there was one time when I said to the kids, there were 3 of them, we had good kids, because they were disciplined, and I think it was an evening service, and they were getting out of the car. I said, okay, be good. And my wife kind of sat there in the car. You always know you're in trouble when that happens. She just kind of sat there in the car. She said, wait, don't you tell them to be good. They are good. And why did I tell them to be good? Well, I told them to be good for myself, probably. I didn't know that. They didn't need to be told good. They're good kids. Why didn't I say, have a good time, have fun? Have you ever noticed in the Gospels, or not in the Gospels, in the book of Philippians, it's okay to have too much? Paul said, I've learned to have too little, I've learned to have too much. I like that passage, don't you? It's okay for a missionary to have too much. It's okay for a missionary to have a nice car. It's okay for a missionary to have new clothes. It's okay for a pastor to have some nice things. I've found this. When I've been paid well, I've been pretty happy about it. And I won't say I worked harder, but I worked happier. And do you like having money? I like having money. Do you? Anybody doesn't like money? You ask me, do you want more or less? More. See, quick answer. Like more. Today, when I get an honorarium, I have a policy. I never look at it until I get home. But I look at that, and when a church pays me well, I'm very grateful. I think some pay too much. I don't tell them that. Some pay a little too much, and some don't pay very much. And I'm not too happy about that. Will I go back again? Yeah. But my wife's quick on that. We got a raise. Oh, good. How much of that is how much of that's coming my way? Because she's got, there's things to do with that money, right? I got a great wife in this area. She, when I was at Michigan State, I met her. I was 21. She was 23. She was headed for a campus crusade, and she knew I was going to seminary. So at some point we got kind of serious, but she said, yeah, I'm not working you through seminary. I'm going into ministry. So I had a wife by the time we got married. She'd already in ministry. She already knew how to handle money. I knew already she wasn't in it for money, or she wouldn't have been on cruise staff. I was just tremendous. It's a wonderful blessing. And even today, I'm not going to say I freaked out when I heard that I was losing my position, because if I'd been 45, I would have freaked out, I think. I'm 64, I'm near the end, but my wife was just really pretty even about it. Well, wouldn't say she's happy. She said, well, you could have waited another year, but she's okay. God's always provided for us. So if you get a wife like that, you got a good thing. Got a good thing. My wife is low maintenance. Low maintenance. All you guys are already married? No? Some of you aren't? You guys aren't? Yeah, you know. Is she high maintenance or low? Okay. I was going to say, for most of you, it's too late. I mean, you made a covenant. You made a covenant. No way out. That covenant's three-way, isn't it? So that's the thing. You break a covenant, you're breaking something with God. Anyway, that's... Let's move on to number 2, freedom from debilitating debt. Here's the deal. Yes, sir.
I apologize to interrupt you as you move on.
I'm glad for you to interrupt me. That makes it great.
Okay. Before you move on, though, number 1, the reasonableness in salary and benefits. I think one of the biggest struggles in churches is to know how much to continue to reward the pastor, not in a reward sense, but contribute to the pastor's salary when you're on a limited budget, and you can't just continue to increase and increase and increase every year when you have a budget that you have to meet. So can you give some comments on that, just your experience, your thoughts, and how to handle that situation?
Yeah. I think that the senior pastor, I'm talking from a staff situation now, not solo, but a senior pastor has to represent his staff, and there would be times when the senior in a larger church is usually making quite a bit of money. I would say there would be times when he should say, I do not want a raise, but I want my staff to get one. Or even, I would be willing to take a small cut, but I want my staff to have some more money because they're not getting enough. The other thing, let's see, my first year as an associate, there was a strike with Caterpillar, and people were hurting. They had no money. They were out on the picket line. And our church was heavily populated by Cat line workers. And the pastor said to me, Dan, I just want you to know, I'm sorry to say this, I'm going to refuse a raise this year. I'm going to be proactive. Tell them I can't take money, which meant I wasn't going to get anything either. I think that was a good move. So I think you have to be sensitive to that. If you have a lot of unemployment, then I don't think you should get a raise. And the more proactive we are on this, the more this speaks to our integrity and our credibility. And hopefully the elders would say, Pastor refused a raise. So that would be my answer. Sometimes you have to bite the bullet, just like in a corporation. Well, unfortunately in some of these corporations, the executives continue to take money when it's going downhill. But a good leader shouldn't do that. So I've been at years at Moody where it was really tight and the administration said we just can't afford a raise. But then later on in the year, they would give us some money back. But I think that was okay. They communicated honestly, and the upper guys weren't getting money and all of that. Does that help? Am I being specific enough? So that's the reasonableness. Sometimes you just can't have a raise and you don't cry about it because times are tough. That's the way it is. this person I'm working with needs to be a little more assertive. So I said, when they give you numbers, here's the thing. If you're hiring a woman on staff, she's usually 5th or 6th, right? So you're going to have pastor, probably an associate, maybe a youth minister or something. Probably not going to have a female. I said, whatever they offer you, say yes to the job, but then ask them for $2,000 more. See what they say. I said, I hope I don't lose your job. But you can sometimes ask. So I did that too when I was negotiating with the pastor. At first I said, the first year I was being holy Joe, I said, well, whatever you want to give me. Yeah, I stopped doing that. So toward the end, they would offer me something and I'd say, could you do this? But then sometimes, like I said, wave it off, don't ask.
Isn't it fair to add also, forgive me, that the pastor's role is to help the church get better?
Yeah, that's
Or
true.
part of his role.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And word out on the street is millennials are cheap. Say I resent that I'm a millennial. Well, the generation is fun-loving but cheap. Very relational but cheap. So I think we're going to have to teach that, because there's a generation where that giving was very steady. They're dying. So all of these new style churches, and also we're going to see how well they do, because when the older generation drops off and the younger generation has to carry the ball financially, it's going to be a big deal. I think that will perhaps be the next crisis. Now, I'm not against millennials. I love a lot about the generation, but I do notice that there is a selfishness. Everything we do has to be published on Facebook. My wife was saying the other day, my main comment to that is, who cares? You know? Who cares what you did over the weekend? I don't. Anyhow, that's the challenge that you teach on giving. Yeah, it's good. This thing of getting into debt, if you're getting into more and more debt, the way to get out of it, there are 2 ways to get out of debt. One is to spend less, the other is to make more. Spend less, make more. If you are already managing your money well and you're going into debt, you need to change positions. Get another job. Or just say to the church, honestly, we're not making it based on what we're giving. Now, you need to have a budget. You need to have a disciplined budget and try to stick to that. But sometimes there's just no more room in the budget, and you have to do something else. Watch those credit cards. They're really rough. You've had this lecture before. I know everybody's had it, but we keep doing it. Credit card's so easy. You just pay in advance and so forth. I think the best use of a credit card is only using it for convenience, and you have the backup. You already know that you have the capacity to pay that, because that can creep up on you. Then a temperate lifestyle. A temperate lifestyle. How should we live? Well, live kind of in the middle. I'm not saying this, I'm afraid when I say certain things that I'm setting a standard for everybody. I'm not. I like new cars. I've never had one yet, but I've had nice cars. I've never had a brand new car, but I've had nice cars. And we have found that you can buy a car that's 2 or 3 years old, and that's be a very nice car. And when you buy something that's good. So we bought Toyotas. I was bragging to Rock here. I'm not driving it today, but I have a 2002 Toyota Avalon. Nice car. Leather seats. Moonroof. Did you hear me? 2002. It still purrs like a kitten. 244,000 miles on it. It was nice to begin with. We bought it probably with 60,000 miles. Do you know a Toyota is just getting broken in at 60,000? Just getting broken in. I'm hoping, and now it's just a commuter car. It's about 8,000 miles a year, drive it here and there. And we have now a Venza, and we're driving that. That'll probably also go up to 300,000. But they were nice to begin with. But sometimes buying something nice, it lasts a long time. That's part of a lifestyle. Another thing, well, we don't wear suits much anymore, right? Who wears a suit? We're keeping untuck it in business. That's fine. Okay. Did you get that untuck it thing? Buy a good one. Buy good stuff. A good suit is a better investment than a bad one that falls to pieces. You're going to have a suit anyway for funerals or weddings or something like that. Buy something good because it looks good all the time, and it'll last a long time. It is a better investment than buying something that's quite inexpensive. You do not have to dress the best in the church. I would say you can be stylish, but you don't have to be the trendsetter. I had a guy preach once in class. I always make them dress up a little bit, wear a shirt and tie in class, and if a woman's presenting, whatever's similar to that. This guy, I mean, he was all that. He had the short little pants and I thought, wow, man, how much did that cost? Do you really need that $100 pair of blue jeans? Yes, and I need to untuck it. Well, you really don't. Yes, I do. Well, so live moderately. Live moderately in this. I would say moderate vacations. Just you may really have to think about that. Yeah, you probably need to think about that some. Live a temperate lifestyle. Live within your means because you're trying to coach a congregation. Sometimes you're going to be in a very well-to-do congregation. Those people need to learn to live within their means too, and they need to learn to stop their lifestyle and to give above that, right? So you need to think about that. You need to think about that you're an example to the congregation. So, when we were in the pastorate, we were trying to find some cool license plates. And my wife found out that in the state of Illinois, you can specialize your license plates at no extra cost. You just have to have a series of letters and numbers. So we decided we're going to have the first letter of each of our names in the family, and then the number of us. So D, B, J, E, A, 5. Dan, Betsy, Joe, Elizabeth, Abby, 5 of us. We had like a customized license plate for no extra cost. It was amazing to us that within about 3 years, loads of people in the church had done the same thing. First initials of all their names, the number in their family. Why? Because we did. They're going to copy you. Like it or not, they're going to do what you do. They're going to copy your lifestyle. So be conscious of it. sometimes it's a little bit hard. My mom passed away and left me a relatively new car. It was a Buick Century. That's the old person's car. But anyway, she left that to me. This was before the Toyotas came on the scene. I think it hurt me getting a raise the next year. I'm not sure. But I remember one of the guys saying, I wish I had a new Buick. Oh, it was a LeSabre. That's what it was, not a Century. Centuries used to be top of the line. Now they're not. But it was a LeSabre. It was a nice car. But that put us kind of above a lot of people in our congregation. I should have had an announcement. Hey, everybody, my mother gave me the car. So live that temperate lifestyle. Also, watch for eating out. Eating out can really hurt you. You can do it sometimes, just like everybody else. Budget for it. It's a line item budget. In our family, we still use those old envelopes. We don't do everything online. We have, $300 or $400 each paycheck goes into envelopes. So there's an entertainment envelope and so on and so on. And when that's out, it's out. When it's out, it's out. We don't have any money for that. Till then, we can go out and eat. We can go on a date. We can do something there. But do be careful about eating out. That can in a hurry, get to be too much. Well, I think I'm about out for right now. Do you want? Yeah. Okay. 5 more questions.
I have a question.
Oh yeah.
What's your view about pastors with alcohol?
Wow. Where'd that come from?
Well, Trevor made me start thinking of.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give you my view. My view is that one cannot preach complete abstinence from the Bible. I don't think you can find it there. I preach through Ecclesiastes. It says go out and drink wine, have a party, wear nice clothes. I could not exegetically teach people that they need to abstain. I do. I have not had a drink since I was probably 20 years old. I do it for certain reasons. I don't think it helps me to advance the gospel. But I could not preach that that's spiritual. I know a lot of very spiritual people who drink wine. They don't get drunk. You can't do that. But if I preach this sometimes, and pretty soon I will get a folder from the Women's Temperance Union, who are a no drinking under any condition thing. They'll have the idea that I always get in trouble on the side issues. I didn't come here to teach that, but I will answer this. The idea that that the wine in the New Testament was just grape juice, that is poppycock. That is nonsense. That's exegetical. It's just nonsense exegetically. You can't. It's not. Be not drunk with grape juice. Is that what the text says?
The Greek word is Welch's.
Yeah. So I remember a very conservative I taught on this once, and a very conservative young woman. She had gone to master's college. Very conservative, fine young lady. She came up to me and said, Dr. Green, I just want to make sure that you're not saying that drinking is sin. Because my dad is a missionary in England, and he and the other elders planting a church, they go to the pub, and they have their elders meetings, they drink a beer. In my mind, there's nothing. I don't do it. I don't do it myself, but I could not tell other Christians you can't have a drink. I can't get there exegetically. I just have to be honest. I think there are times when what we're preaching is just too conservative for the text. And I believe that in fundamentalism, this is the history of it, fundamentalism in the 1920s was a political movement, and they figured to hook up with some groups like the Women's Temperance Union would give more clout, and that stuff got started. But I don't think it's a historic teaching of the church. It's a probably a 20th century thing, where we don't dance, we don't drink, we don't dancing. Oh my goodness. My millennial students have so much fun. I'll go to their wedding. I envy the fun they have. I envy the fun they have. I'm so uptight, dancing, drinking. I'm not saying they're not drinking, but they dance and they have fun together. It's okay as Christians to have some fun. I don't think you're convinced. Your arms are folded.
I agree.
So total abstention teaching in my idea is heretical. It's heretical. It goes beyond the Scriptures. But I already told you tithing and Sabbath are not biblical teaching, so you probably, I'm getting in trouble. But that's what I'd say. There are reasons to limit myself, but I choose voluntarily to limit myself. Now, say a church said, Pastor, we want to call you, but we want to promise you won't drink. I would say, I will not promise. Even though I fully intend not to, I would not make that promise because it's legalism in my mind. I will not put myself under the yoke of bondage. Even though I have no intentions of drinking. But someday I might, because I've gotten my ideas on this have evolved. At first it was, no good Christian would ever drink, and I won't drink. Then it was, well, there's a little liberty there, but I still wouldn't do it. Now it's, they're fully free to do this. I have students and I have friends of my kids where they grew up very conservative Christian homes, but their culture was they had wine on the table every night. My son married into a family, they're Italians, and they have wine almost every night. You have this pasta, you have this wine. You have that pasta, you have that wine. And it's cultural. I've never seen any of them drink too much. So. Yeah.
Part of yourself easy on others.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah. Part of the reason I don't drink too is that I'm a 100%er. That is, whatever I do, I do. If I'm studying, I'm going to get a doctorate. If I'm going to do, and I know that about myself. I'm afraid that I would take down the whole bottle. But I'm not going to preach against somebody having something in moderation. I think I'm ready. Yeah.